All right, so let's address the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, and that being in regard to reliability. I get this comment all the time from people saying, even though I've addressed this previously, that it's not a big deal, that classic cars are not unreliable, they don't believe me. And another thing is parts availability is going to be impossible. And I actually started setting this up a few months ago, so you'll see in the charts and the graphs, or the charts, I should say, from Excel that I can show you in the terms of availability of parts and the terms of cost of parts. I think you might be surprised. But we're going to pit this 1969 Ford Mustang, both in the form that it is now and basically original, straight up stock, showroom floor OEM, if you will, and this 2013 Ford Focus. We're looking at how long does it take to get parts and how expensive are the parts even available, and typically the parts that you're going to find that actually wear out. Now, I'm not sure why people feel like classic cars are particularly unreliable. I'm not sure how they got that reputation. Basically, you're just dealing with a really old used car. The more mileage you put on a car, the older a car is, rubber parts and brake parts, wear parts, they have a tendency to wear out, break down, and you need to replace those. The chief issue you're going to find in a classic car is, reliability due to maintenance issues. Things that are expected to break or wear out over time. I see some videos where people drive on bad alternators and the car won't start anymore. It's not the car's fault, and it's not a classic car issue. It's a used car issue. These things are out of warranty, and yes, if you're driving a modified version of one of these classic cars, you're going to find it almost impossible to get warranty coverage. However, there are warranty options available out there for factory cars with the original transmission, engine, drivetrain, alternators, electrical components. All of that kind of stuff can be covered under a warranty for a classic car, but not if you've gone in there and modified it. So, if you need a car to be reliable and you can't afford the unexpected expense, classic cars that have been modified might not be a good choice. People are concerned about carburetors. Carburetors aren't reliable, and that's totally false. Honda and Toyota had carbureted cars into the 1990s. There's nothing inherently unreliable about carburetors. They'll go for years and years and years, giving you no problems whatsoever. And that's if you daily drive it. Now, if you park it for 6 months and then drive it and then park it for 6 months, carburetors are a little bit more finicky. They have a tendency to build up gunk in the carburetor bowls and cause issues that way. But a carburetor clean and rebuild, essentially like replacing gaskets, if you do that once every 5-10 years, you can get away with that, especially with the daily driver. It's a couple $100. It's not an insurmountable expense. It's not an abnormal expense. So the things that you're going to find that are breaking on a classic are the same thing that you would find breaking on a relatively modern used car. Alternators, belts, hoses, brakes. The components are pretty similar. They're very similar to modern cars. So let's get into the comparison spreadsheet and see what parts are available, what parts are not available, and what people might think a classic car would have problems with. Okay, so here is our aforementioned spreadsheet that I put together in regard to how difficult it is to get parts for the 69 Mustang, how difficult it is to get parts for a modern used car, and how much they cost. Of course, we have our factory style 69 Mustang with the 302 and the 2-barrel and the C4 the way that it came. Then the 69 Mustang as it is today with the 427 and the TKO 600, and my 2013 Ford Focus comes with a 2-liter and the power shift, manual, automatic, whatever you want to call it. Over here on the left, you see the kind of parts that I'm talking about. These are the parts that wear out, break down. It doesn't matter whether or not it's a classic car or if it is a modern used car. We have the price here in each one, and we have the availability, how long it takes to get for each one. Now, when it comes to where I check to get these parts, I went to O'Reilly Auto first, then I went to AutoZone, and then I went to Napa. And here's the scoop behind that. I am closest to an O'Reilly, and AutoZone is just a little bit further away, and then Napa is just a little bit further away from that. Both O'Reilly and Napa Auto have major distribution warehouses here in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. O'Reilly's just a couple minutes away, and then AutoZone's just a few minutes away, and Napa in general is just a few minutes away. So I did primarily looking for something that's within 10 minutes of drive time for my location. Napa might take an extra day if I don't drive over to the warehouse, which is more like, a 20-minute drive for me or something like that. But one thing that you're going to be surprised at is, as we look down at the availability here between the three, the one that's the most difficult to get parts for is the Focus. The thing you might also be surprised at is the final price. If we add up all the parts that I'm talking about here, you can see the factory Mustang, very inexpensive. The modified Mustang with the 427, because as anybody who has an FE engine knows, it stands for friggin' expensive. You tell them that there's a 427 and they reach underneath the counter and pull out the book made out of gold leaf. Luckily, there's not too much that actually goes wrong with engines, so to speak. And then there is the Focus here, which is double the cost of the modified Mustang, and 3 times the cost of the original factory stock style Mustang. Now, you can see everything in stock. You can see the type of parts we're talking about, the ones that actually fail, the ones that we need to replace. Low beams, high beams, cap and rotor, spark plugs, belts, hoses, brake shoes, pads, calipers, drums, all that kind of stuff, master cylinders, batteries, alternators. You can read down the list, water pumps, what the costs are, things like outer tie rod ends, shocks and struts, basically the things that you're going to run into. But the reality is also electric components, the electronic stuff. Really a lot of back order stuff for the Focus. Radiator hoses on back order here. Heater core on back order. Down here, this is a big one. The transmission control module. It's a real problem for the 2011 and later Ford Fiestas and Ford Focuses with the automatic, which is basically an automatically shifted or electronically shifted manual transmission. $325, the least expensive source on back order. You can't even get those from the dealer. My mom's Fiesta went out a few months ago, and 3 months. That's how long they needed to get one of those things in. Everything was being held up. I would really doubt that it's any better today. And again, these are the types of parts that wear out or break down. It doesn't matter if it's a modern used car or a classic used car. The one area that you might run into some problems is if you have like a Lincoln or a Cadillac, a mid-level production car. So it wasn't something super common like a Mustang or a Charger or a Chevelle, Camaro, that type of thing, but a specialty car, a luxury car where they made a couple thousand of them, but they didn't make a lot. When it comes to those types of cars, the auto manufacturers would build parts specifically for those models, and you would only have a few thousand of them out there, which means the parts can be difficult to come by.
But when you're talking about a mainstream manufactured vehicle that a lot of people bought, that there are a lot out there, your Galaxies and your Camaros and your Chargers and all that kind of stuff, parts availability, much better than what you would expect. And of course the cost, much lower than a modern car. So do keep that into consideration. Again, there's really nothing that I've found that's inherently unreliable about classic cars. It's just whether or not somebody took care of it, whether or not somebody maintained it before you bought it. So the big 800-pound gorilla that everybody's scared of, the reliability and not being able to find parts, honestly, for most people, for most of these cars, it's really not an issue. So I hope that helped people out. And yeah, don't be scared of classics because of reliability.
So there was one more thing, and I guess a day later, I was editing the video and I realized I forgot something that was really important. And I wanted to address this, and that is the perception of lifespan on a classic car. So if you were born, 1980 or earlier, or later, and you were looking for a really inexpensive car for your first car, chances are that everything with 100,000 miles plus was considered disposable. The normal vehicle lifespan back in the 70s, the 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s for the older cars was at 100,000 miles, they went to the junkyard or they got sold for parts. They were all rusted out. The engines were burning 2 quarts of oil every 1,000 miles. They were tired. The transmissions were shot. They needed a full rebuild. And that didn't really start changing until after a lot of import cars started really putting 150, 200,000 miles on them, and the American cars kind of came around they just lasted longer with better materials. They didn't rust out as quickly, etc. And I think that leads to the perception perhaps that classic cars are just worn out at 100,000 miles and everything needs to be replaced, or that they just inherently wear out quicker because the parts weren't designed as well, or like modern cars. And I can't say 100% that the parts on classic cars, the design of the part was superior or inferior to modern cars, but I can tell you that there are very few parts on a car that are designed to wear. For example, piston rings, which is usually what winds up wearing out when an engine is shot. They aren't designed to wear. They're designed to ride on a thin film of oil. And modern lubricants are what you're going to be using in a classic car today. They have the benefit of decades of science and research, and today's lubricants, oils, greases are just light years better than what they had in the 60s and 70s. Meaning there's no inherent reason why a classic car is going to wear a lot faster or substantially faster than a modern car. Modern cars have really, really tight tolerances, where classic cars are a little more loosey-goosey to begin with. But that's for emissions, not necessarily for wear. And in fact, the tighter you get those tolerances, the more risk you have of something wearing prematurely if the oil isn't fabulous. And modern oils and greases compared to older ones are fabulous. And it's also the case that even if you buy a replacement part for a classic car today, it's manufactured on the same machine that is being used to manufacture modern car parts. It's using the same materials. They don't go and dig up some organic brake pads to make for classic cars. In many cases, what you're going to have is what I have on the Mustang, which is ceramic pads that, of course, weren't available back in the day. They last way longer. Clutch discs and friction materials as well. They're going to be based on modern materials, modern components that just are in the shape of the old classic part. Suspension components, greases. If you want to take an example of how much better greases have become, there's a YouTube channel called Project Farm. Love that guy. And he does a lot of testing, and he happened to come across, somebody sent him some sealed old grease from, I don't know, it was the 40s or something. And the guy in Project Farm sent it through the loops, compared it against modern greases, and the very first test
was kind of a tension test to see how tacky the grease was, how much pressure it took to pull the grease or the two discs apart. And the old grease performed exceptionally. It did really, really well. But it wasn't nearly as good on water resistance, resistance to corrosion. It didn't have the same kind of film strength. It didn't have the heat tolerance. The bottom line is lubricants have come a long, long way. And you're really running with modern lubricants, modern materials that go into that classic car part today. So you shouldn't expect necessarily that a classic car part is just destined to wear out faster either. You're using modern components and materials in the shape of a classic car part. So do keep that in mind. Yeah, again, I hope this video is really helpful and helps illustrate why you shouldn't necessarily be concerned about the reliability of a classic car versus the reliability of a more modern used car.